In 1959, the U.S. Army completed a plan for a manned military outpost on the moon. The Horizon Lunar Outpost was said to be necessary to protect United States interests on the moon, to conduct moon-based surveillance of the Earth and space, to act as a communications relay, and to serve as a base for exploration of the moon. The permanent outpost would cost $6 billion and become operational in December 1966 with 12 soldiers. The base would be defended against Russian overland attack by man-fired weapons. The Apollo program began only 2 years after the Horizon report, but a moon base would not have been established earlier than the 1970s.
During the discussion of UFOs, the question ultimately is going to come up, can any government keep secrets, let alone the U.S. government? And the answer to that is unequivocally yes.
People in high-level government have very, very little, if any, information, valid information about this. Most have no more knowledge than the man in the street.
There's always been what they call the need to know.
They keep pretty much each organization an island unto itself.
I looked at him and I was pretty startled because I'd worked out there several years and never seen anything like this, never heard of anything like this.
I had a top secret crypto clearance, and I could go into areas where my commanders, some commanders could not even get in.
He was a civilian, but had done a lot of work with NASA on a lot of committees and what have you. And I think his problem was the fact that he hadn't heard about this.
They can't get in there because they don't have the need to know, even though they have the same clearance as the guy that gets to go in there.
He knew that he was very important because he was on a lot of committees in NASA. And since he was very important but hadn't heard about this thing, this couldn't be true.
The UFO secrets can be kept secret from other people who have the same security clearance.
And then he said a very curious thing. I wouldn't believe it even if it was real. This is a direct quote from his email to me. I would not believe this even if it was real.
And the truth is, they have hidden things like UFO and extraterrestrial information from us for years. Not just the current era, but back before the 1900s.
There's about 38 levels above top secret. The highest is cosmic. That's, okay, I'll tell you right now, that's UFOs, aliens, and particleization. Now, like you heard a while ago, there's only probably about 25 people in the world that know things that are known at that level. No president has had that level, has ever been cleared for that level. Eisenhower was the closest. Eisenhower wanted somebody to be in charge. He tried the CIA director, and it didn't work. CIA was working primarily for itself. Most of the intelligence directors of the services working for themselves.
What happened was Eisenhower got sold out. I think that he realized that all of a sudden this matter is going into the control of corporations. He realized that he was losing control. He realized that the phenomenon of whatever it was that we were faced with was not going to be in the best hands. As far as I can remember, that was the expression that was used. It's not going to be in the best hands.
He had our best interest in mind and was a very loving person. And what I love about this family too is we're very humble. He grew up on a farm, felt this calling. His family didn't necessarily agree with him, and just rose into the position he was in, became a 5-star general, and it wasn't really a part of the fabric of the global elite. He was fighting against that false power structure.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals.
And so it was organized under the name, the NRO. You couldn't mention NRO.
NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, basically run by the Air Force. The Reconnaissance Office, from my understanding of people that I've had contacts with since I retired, has taken on a lot more responsibility, particularly towards UFO and extraterrestrial activities. You could say that they picked up where Blue Book dropped off.
If you're on that level, there's an organization worldwide called ACIO. That's Alien Contact Intelligence Organization. If you pay your dues and you follow the rules, you can benefit, your government is allowed to benefit from that organization's information.
Henry Kissinger headed some sort of a study group back in the 50s to study the ramifications of this information if it had leaked through a credible source. In fact, Jimmy Carter was not brought into the loop. They, for some reason, the group, the control group, they don't trust the guy for some reason. They don't trust Jimmy Carter. They were afraid that he would come out and make statements, blanketed statements to the news media.
I was contacted by Ms. Marcia Smith, who was the director of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service. She asked to meet with me, and I met with her, and she informed me that President Carter, upon taking office in January of 1977, held a meeting with then the Director of Central Intelligence, who was George Bush Sr., and demanded that the Director of Central Intelligence turn over to the President the classified information about unidentified flying objects and the information that was in the possession of the United States intelligence community concerning the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. This information was refused to the President of the United States by the Director of Central Intelligence, George Bush Sr.
He told us we could not talk about this to anyone, including any of the other crews, our spouses, our family, even amongst each other. So we could not discuss this at all.
In the military, they do ridicule you, because I was ridiculed a few times. I was told I would never make Master Sergeant. I was on orders for tech, but I was told I would never make Master Sergeant if I brought this crap up again.
The pilots that had seen things and talked about it, some of them were let go. Some of them released from their flying and treated as nutcases and things like that.
At times I used to carry nuclear weapons. In other words, I was mentally fit to carry nuclear weapons, but I'm not mentally fit if I see a UFO. Well, this criticism and this ridicule has, I think, done more to keep the story coming out than almost anything else.
It had been discussed with me on numerous occasions. Talked about what could happen to me militarily and what could happen to me even if I discussed this as a civilian.
That subject just was dropped. It just wasn't discussed.
Anything to discredit you, and you'd never get a promotion, and I'd spend the next 3.5 years up at the North Pole living in a tent checking the weather balloons.
I've made no money from this. I've got nothing but pain and suffering out of talking about it. I've been harassed at my home. This was used against me partially in losing a job once in teaching. I've had a hell of a time after I've told this story, but I continue to tell the story because I think it's important for people to understand that this sort of shit goes on in the government.
He was sorry he wrote the book. He was sorry he exposed the family to the ridicule, to the lawsuits. It's been very tough on our entire family. He did not want to die, leaving us with these problems. Just hope that the future people such as yourself and me will know what to do with this type of knowledge that this man brought forward. I do say that he is the first man to come forward in a high capacity.
Measures have been taken by agencies to terminate people who appear to be inconvenient or troublesome through knowing too much.
I would go interview people that claimed they had seen something and try to convince them they hadn't seen something or they were, hallucinating or something. Well, if that didn't work, another team would come in and give all the threats and threaten them, their family, and so on and so forth. And they would be in charge of discrediting them, make them look foolish or so on and so forth. Now, if that didn't work, then there was another team that put an end to that problem, one way or the other. Secretary of Defense Forstall was the first real powerful known person that was eliminated because he was going to release the information. And nobody has ever paid for that crime. That crime has never been really thoroughly investigated by forces to see what happened to him. But most people know that he was thrown out the window of the hospital, and he wasn't killed by being thrown out the window, but he never got up alive.
He was talking about being erased. And I said, man, what do you mean erased? He said, yes. He said, you will be erased. I said, how do you know all this? Or something to that effect. And he said, I know. He said, they'll go after not only you, he said, they'll go after your family. Now, those were his words.
And they're yelling at me and they're hollering and cursing and you didn't see anything, and we'll do you and your whole goddamn family. And they're it was basically that for about 8 or 9 hours. These guys, they're just off on their own. There's no oversight, no control. And they just do whatever they want. They don't, and they're evil, man. These people are evil.
Basically, it's an oversight group intermingled with the National Security Council and the National Security Planning Group. They have full control. They have no congressional oversight whatsoever. They answer to nobody except for the President of the United States. But they're trying to push it aside away from the President.
When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries in 1974 through 77, I met the late Dr. Wernher von Braun in early 74. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played, that game being the effort to weaponize space.
Weapons in space is still a big enigma. Black covert operations.
Von Braun's purpose in life during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons are dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, undesirable. The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons.
The ballistic missile defense system is probably a pipe dream in the sense that if what it's designed for is that you know where it's coming from. And when we had Russia, there was a 50-50 chance that you knew about where it would be coming from.
In 1977, I was at a meeting in Fairchild Industries in a conference room called the War Room. And in that room were a lot of charts on the walls with enemies, identified enemies, names that people had never heard of, names like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. But we were talking then about terrorists, the potential terrorists. No one had ever talked about this before, but this was the next stage after the Russians against whom we were going to build space-based weapons, these terrorists.
They wanted a weapon system they could put in space that would stop a ballistic missile. That was the concept.
This is 1977, and they were talking about creating a war in the Gulf region when there was $25 billion in the space-based weapons program that yet had not been identified. It wasn't called the Strategic Defense Initiative, at least, until 1983. This weapons system then had obviously been going on for some time that I didn't know anything about.
When Star Wars was brought out as an idea, which was before Reagan actually, and incorporated into his administration, it became pretty much a window dressing, as one people would call it, but there was a lot of truth behind what they were trying to do. They knew the basic principle of what they wanted to do.
So I stood up in this meeting in 1977 and it said, I'd like to know why we're talking about space-based weapons against these enemies. I'd like to know more about this. Would somebody tell me what this is about? Nobody answered. They went on with this meeting as though I hadn't said anything. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern.
With the rogue nations we have today, it's absolutely ludicrous.
But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie.
Well, if they were hostile, my own knowledge is, and feeling, I don't know about all of them, is that we could have been, with their weaponry as it might be used, it could have destroyed us a long time ago.
If beings can travel in time-space, then anything we would put in orbit as a weapon would be like going against Genghis Khan with a firecracker.
Now, some would like for us to believe and like to develop the idea that the aliens and people are our enemy now, but that's not true.
I noticed the satellite's positionings. I said, now this is supposed to be a system that tracks radar anomalies on Earth, right? You know, the whole thing, the movement. Yep, that's what it does. And I said, so why are half of them pointed towards the outer space? Towards the moon, towards areas that are just blank space.
I have concluded that I'm fighting against the clock, that I have but a short time to try to convince people that we are moving in an avenue where we are going to militarize space. As a result of militarizing space, we are going to acquire new technology. We're going to evolve new technology.
Well, at least half of those satellites you got up there aren't looking at Earth.
He had received several transmissions from the Pentagon and from other satellite monitoring stations of the NSA that they were tracking ETVs, extraterrestrial, that stands for extraterrestrial vehicles.
I said,